So first of all, thank you very much for attending. It's a great turnout, and I hope you like the venue and what we're doing today, which is on the great content waste. For those of you who don't know me, my name is James Harper. I'm the founder of 28B, which is we've been in business for 14 years, helping field teams and pharma engage with content and data, and also co-founder of 28C team, over there, creative agency that craft with purpose. I just want to talk a little bit about the digital pharma community before we get on to our lovely panel and what we're doing today. I was getting a little sick of hearing the great next global strategy being presented at large commercial events and how easy that was going to be and how it's going to transform all of our workflows, etc., without that person on stage really addressing some of the practicalities, some of the issues, some of the real problems that digital transformation can bring to those of us that have a day job doing the work at the coalface. So the DPU is a non-commercial event. This is not sponsored. There's no one else involved other than 28B backing this. And I just wanted to bring together thought leaders and experts to talk about some of the knottier problems that don't always get addressed. And I hope today that you'll get some guidance and insight and hopefully take something away that's practical to address the problems. This problem today on the great content waste. So some stats and some figures for you on the great content waste and why we're here today. The latest Pulse data, which released this week, and we have our lovely Viva representation over here. So the Viva Pulse data, if you don't know, is a worldwide survey pulse of the data that, in terms of the engagement data in Viva. 650 million data points, I think, go into that. And in the latest finding, 80%, or just under 80%, of the content that's created for HCPs never reaches the HCP. 80%. Right? And the figure before that, very close to my heart, is about the field. 77% of the content that we create for field teams is rarely or never used. There's other data points from Capgemini, etc., that 40 to 50% of global content is never localized. Right? Now, we're probably, I'd like to think around this room, most of you at some point are involved in the content journey. Just think about all that wasted blood, sweat, and tears that went into that content, and then it's just not reaching our audience, whether that be through the field, through digital, through omnichannel, through websites, whatever it is, something's wrong. So that's what I wanted us to talk about today. And on this panel, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But starting this end, we've got Global. We've got someone from Global. Then we've got local affiliate brand team. Then compliance. Agency. Let's hear it for agencies. And field. It's not often, I have to say, it's quite hard to get someone from field to these events. So, Gareth, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to allow Mark to start off, and what I'm going to ask is each person to introduce themselves. And I should say, at this point, everyone on this panel, their views are their own. They do not represent the views of the companies they work for. Please respect that. You know, it's very difficult to get people on stage to talk openly and honestly about this, so thank you very much for everyone for doing that. So we're going to work our way down, let them introduce themselves, and then I'm going to challenge them on maybe it's their fault, all this content waste. So, Mark.
Is that working? Oh, yes. Okay, working very well. So hi everyone, my name is Mark Wheeler. I'm currently the Global Omnichannel Strategy Director at Kerianne. For those that do know me, I've worked in agency land for a long time as well, so 20 odd years, and actually there's some familiar faces in this room, which is lovely to see, actually making me slightly more nervous than I was expecting. But currently working at Kerianne, so I have a bit more of an eye on omnichannel specifically. Don't hate me, what a horrible word it's becoming. But as a result, it puts me right in the middle of everything that happens at a global level, I think, from strategy through to content creation as well. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. And Kerianne?
Hi, I'm Kerianne. I am a brand manager within the pharmaceutical industry. I've recently moved from the medical team to the commercial team, so I've got experience across both functions, and I'm a pharmacist by background, so I spent 5 years working in NHS hospitals. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And Sarah?
Hi, my name's Sarah Clarke. I'm a freelancer, and I am an ABPI signatory, and I've been working in industry for 40 years, so I've seen a lot of evolution and change in that time, and the vast majority of what I do now is train people on the ABPI code, because I believe a lot of people have mistaken ideas about what it actually says and what it doesn't say. And I, like Kerianne, have also crossed the great divide into marketing. I did do a couple of years as an assistant brand manager just to see what it was like on the other side, and then immediately came back to medical, and that's where I've stayed ever since.
Katie.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Langdon. I run a healthcare communication agency with my sister, Fiona Edwards, who's also in the audience. Thank you for coming, Fee. We exist so that nobody feels lost in healthcare, and actually one of the reasons that we set up several years ago was that we both worked in the industry for our whole careers. We went freelance, worked at lots of different agencies to kind of see how everyone was doing it, and just felt incredibly frustrated by what we found there, and we couldn't find the perfect agency to work at. And one of the frustrations was really around the content that is created, the massive agency churn and waste that we see sometimes, definitely in the big networks. And we decided that it wasn't right and that HCPs and patients really deserve better. So we are very, very passionate about this, and we are on a mission to put the care back into healthcare communications, and that includes the great content waste and trying to fix it. So looking forward to coming up with some solutions today, James.
And Gareth.
Yeah, finally me. So here representing sales. So I was a sales representative back in the day for about 7 or 8 years, and then moved into sales management. I think my LinkedIn profile says 15 years sales management. It's definitely a bit more than that. Probably managed in excess of 250 representatives over the time across quite a few different companies, and also done a stint in marketing, which I again didn't like very much. So came across to sales. So hopefully you'll find some of my insights useful.
Thank you. Just as a small anecdote, how did I get into this industry? Because it's relevant. So I left university with a science degree, a broken down camper van, and a small amount of student debt. So I needed a job that used a science degree, came with a car, and paid okay. So I became a medical rep there. Someone pointed me at the Telegraph on a Thursday. On the back pages was everything that needed a science degree. So I got my Rover 214i, and I became a rep for a company called Pharma. And so I have that experience, and I did a weird jump from repping to agency, which is, I'm going to come on to that in a second. But in terms of the field, this is where it starts, Gareth. Isn't it just the rep's job to use the content they're given? How come they don't use it?
First of all, I did share that first car as well. Exactly so. Is it the rep's job? Yes, it is the rep's job. But the rep's job over time has shifted. I think we overestimate the amount of time our representatives have with clinicians. I think on occasion we overestimate capability. I think we sometimes don't invest enough time in delivery of content and training out of content. And I think I've experienced relatively recently, almost content dumping, an expectation of people knowing where to use it and how to use it. So those are my kind of initial thoughts.
Well, again, anyone who knows me on LinkedIn, this is a tired old message of mine, but we were asked once to build a 276-page sales aid. Right, 276 pages. When I was a rep, you'd printed that out and put it in front of me and said, you've got half an hour to learn this and you're using it tomorrow in front of an HCP, they'd think you were mad if you did that, right? And yet that's what we're asking a lot of the time. So to your point, Gareth, I'm going to bring this over to Katie now. When you launch materials that you've created for the field team, do you feel that it is enough attention is given to that rollout, to the sort of playtime that I think reps should have, not under pressure in front of an HCP, to learn the materials and use them regardless of length?
I think it really depends on the client and the situation. I think sometimes, I remember going to rep trainings and briefings back in the day and being allowed to be in the room as the agency so you could observe the training. It was an incredible experience, and I think now it's a lot further removed. It comes from the marketing team. They don't often always even asked us to get involved with the briefing documents. And I think there are levels of how close you can be to make the content more relevant. And I think there is an agency fault that maybe we should push more, that the strategy needs to feed through the briefing and kind of go a bit back to how it was originally.
Quick straw poll in the room. Hands up if you've been on a field visit in the last 6 months with the field team. Okay. So that for me is a really telling thing. And yeah. So, but I mean that's one of the points, and that's one of the challenges I have to agencies. I know Skin and Blister are different, but do agencies genuinely understand what it's like to be a rep. On Gareth's point is understanding that the average time in front of an HCP is maybe 5 minutes or less.
Honestly, I think most creatives and most agencies don't, especially if you've got art directors coming in from other parts of the industry that are outside of healthcare. I think it kind of gets overlooked, and I definitely think it's important.
So we've got mixed capabilities. We've got understanding the end application of the content, in this case field, but obviously there's other applications for content. And we've touched on scale of content, 276 pages. There's no way to use that wisely. And of course, one of the criticisms of the field might be that they're very hard to keep on brand strategy. So we work very hard on brand strategy, and then we create all these materials, and then by the time it gets to the field carry on doing what they've always done. They just find the slides they like from the larger sales deck. And I won't say who it was when I was out on a field visit, but this one particular rep had taken screenshots of his favorite slides, kept them on the front of his iPad, and that's what he used to detail from. Right? And back in my day, I actually cut up a paper detail aid to reorder it how I thought was better. Right? So we may... but I think that may be because we should be listening.
That was never compliant.
No, that was never compliant. No. And I don't have to worry about that right now. So, or in back in the day. So we're touching on these different problems. And talking of problems, compliance. So is compliance so risk-averse that they stifle innovation? And also maybe another criticism is, do they wish for too much to be put in on every single slide, every single website? Does a GP really need to know what the abbreviation for milligram really means?
I hear you. I do hear you. And although I'm representing compliance here, my role is as a medical signatory. And I would say, I joined the industry, as I said, 40 years ago. There wasn't a compliance function at all. Compliance only became introduced about 15, 20 years ago. And I personally think that actually it's been a real problem because companies have become compliance-led. They think compliance first, as if compliance is the most important thing, when it isn't. Obviously, things have to be compliant, but you have to be thinking when you're producing a material, how do I make impact with this material? How do I make it better? How do I make it work for the user, the reader, be they a healthcare professional like we're talking today, or for a patient? Any materials. That's what you have to be thinking. And to be able to do that, we have to be brought in early. So we need to be part of the decision making as to whether you are going to actually deliver this particular tactic. And you can think a blue sky thinking. It is absolutely possible to do things that have never been done. But if you're compliance first, you're thinking, what's the framework that I need to fit to make sure this is okay? Rather than thinking, actually, is this the right thing to do? Should we be doing this? And then secondarily, how do we do it compliantly? And yes, it takes a lot of effort. And it is a creative and academic challenge. But what I would want you to, my message for today is to see the code as a safety net, not a barrier to things. It's there to stop us going too far. But it's not there to stop us doing innovative and exciting things that will be useful and hopefully get used by reps and get used by local teams. And so I do think a lot of people in compliance may not have had healthcare professional experience and not actually ever been final signatories themselves and not be used to actually living in a world of uncertainty where you don't know for 100% sure whether something is compliant or not. Just like when I'm prescribing, I don't know 100% whether that drug is going to work in that patient. We always live in a world of uncertainty as healthcare professionals. And that's not how compliance teams in general want to be. They want to be 100% sure that we are compliant. And realistically, that's not achievable in a lot of materials, and activities. You have to get comfortable with mitigating and reducing risk rather than trying to abolish it altogether. There will often be risks when you're trying to do great things for people. And so, but that is what I would want you to be doing. So I realize we are a problem, but I think we are also potentially the solution.
So I agree with you that the code shouldn't be seen as a barrier, but it's the interpretation of the code, either by an organization or sometimes the individuals within an organization. And as we work with multiple brand teams in the same organization, it'll often depend on the medic. But equally, this is going to you, Kerianne, It's sometimes the appetite for conflict or the appetite for education from the brand team to the compliance team. So you mentioned about getting in there early. One of our other clients said the other day, the juice is not worth the squeeze, right? And you might be thinking, is this an AI solution? No, fragments in a VAE, right? And they said it's not worth taking on the medic because they're going to struggle with final form. You know, if we're still struggling with final form, but I could level this at brand teams that maybe you need to do more to engage compliance on the journey. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, Kerianne.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. And from personal experience, whenever I've brought compliance on early, it does reduce review time, and it makes it so much easier and simpler to get materials through. However, I do think that we are in an industry where there will always be, always need to build in time for review, which makes it so much more difficult for us to be agile. In other industries, having loads of content, whether it's used or not, is a great thing because it tells you about what works and what doesn't work, right? This is A/B testing. So I do think there's a school of thought that having materials that haven't worked and aren't used does tell you something about that customer base and about how the field teams interact with materials and what materials they like using versus what they don't like using. So on one hand, I think sometimes it's not such a bad thing. However, we know how long it takes to put materials through, to create them. So if we can find a way to reduce that figure down, that 80% figure, I mean, that's stark. We really need to work on that. And for me personally, I think that we are not doing enough to think about the impact of our materials. It's more a case of let's just get this out because we've always done this. We've always had a detail age, so let's have a detail age. Like, are we actually measuring the impact of our materials? Are we really purposely looking at that? And I think field visits are one way and a great way to get qualitative information back about how useful, how relevant, how impactful our materials are. But it's not the only way. And I think we need to get better as an industry at making data-driven decisions. We have data coming in from various different places about how stakeholders interact with our materials, but I'm not sure we're pulling them together to create a concrete story quantitatively as other industries are doing.
100% with you on this. And if we can talk to this a moment, and then I'm going to get a global in a sec. But in terms of the sword of Damocles of data that hangs over our heads, there's an awful lot of people that don't want to look at it because maybe maybe that tells them they're part of that 80%. So until you sort of accept data, it's very difficult. And we do measure content delivery versus content impact. And I will, again, use an anecdote, which I was working with a large international agency, and I challenged them on the size of the detail aid that we were consulting on. And he said, I asked, had you been on a field visit? And this gentleman said, no. And he said, so he got frustrated and said, look, as soon as it's uploaded to Viva, my job is done. And there is kind of this attitude of this tick box, I've done this. So I want to ask a question to the panel. Please jump in, anyone. Is it partly to do with the role churn we have in our industry? Now, if we're going to really invest in data, it's not a one-year return to really understand what's happening. You're looking beyond that. And yet, when we look at people in roles, like we have one account, we've had 4 brand managers in 2 years on that account, and we've had 2 total change in the agency that's working on it. Who's investing in data in the long term?
I think you've just answered your own question. No, you do see an awful lot of role churn. I've experienced it. It tends to be in larger organisations, from my experience, and I think that doesn't help continuity, and it doesn't help continuity with sales teams and buy-in, because it might not be the overall strategy that changes, but a campaign will change, and when a campaign changes, you can often, it's not consistent for customers. I think we try and do too much, and we don't roll it out well. I think we should do less, and we should increase the quality, and we should increase the amount of training and the rollout, and we should stick with the strategies and stick with the campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's been interesting to join a pharma company. I'll use an analogy which hopefully my old agency colleagues will sort of recognise. Personal development plans, spoken about a lot, never really happen, do they? I mean, you're lucky if you get your half-year review or something like that. Except when you join an agency, oh, tell me about the training and the development offer. Oh, it's amazing. It's the best thing that's ever happened, and it's going to, you'll get this, and you'll get a buddy, and you'll get a mentor. It doesn't happen. My experience in pharma is that it does. Development plans exist, and they have to, because our clients and clients are sometimes bonused against those development plans. They're bonused on what they often deliver. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that in pharma, if your development plan is based on what you deliver during that period of time, and it might be a short period of time, right, because we do see a lot of churn, 18 months, 2 years before moving on to another role, what else are you going to get measured on? Because what impact are you expected to be able to bring, measurable impact, in that short space of time? Whereas it's very, very easy to measure what you can deliver. And I think that's a real, it's an interesting twist, an interesting challenge that I think we're up against. Because it's much, much harder to measure whether something has actually had the change that you wanted to bring about, as opposed to whether you fundamentally delivered it. I got it on Viva, I did my job, off I go.
I think I agree with you, Mark, but I do think that we are planning for the short term generally, right? If you launch a product, you hope that it will be available for patients for an amount of time. Yet brand planning has to generally happens on an annual basis. So we're looking at what we want to achieve for that year. How often are we really looking 5 years ahead and what that behaviour change looks like for a HCP in 5 years' time? Because if we did that, it wouldn't matter about the churn of resource and employees, because the strategy is the same. So as long as everyone's singing from that same long-term hymn sheet, surely churn of staff shouldn't make a difference.
I hear what you're saying, and I agree to some extent, but I do think the churn of staff makes a difference in a way, in that quite often the roles, particularly in content review and approval and generation, in terms of marketing, are just stepping stone roles. People are passing through, and they're not invested in the brand, unlike people who are staying in that role for 2 or 3 years, or becoming more senior in that role. They might start as an assistant brand manager, move up to a brand manager, to senior brand manager. That doesn't really happen in lots of the big companies nowadays. It's that they'll quickly switch on to some kind of global role with very little real marketing experience in the local affiliate, and then suddenly they will be responsible for the global materials, which is maybe why they're not used so much, because actually the people who are generating them aren't actually experienced enough marketeers to make good materials, and don't know enough about compliance and the codes, the worldwide codes that they need to comply with, to actually be able to stand and be a visionary and lead everybody. Because when you work with a great marketeer who really understands what they're doing and has passion and vision and foresight, it's wonderful and it inspires everybody. Whereas if you work with a marketeer that is just ticking the box and, well, I've got to deliver a sales aid, 3 emails, by the time I finish this job, then everybody else around feels, well, why should I get myself really invested in this as a passion project? Whereas if the marketeer isn't bothered, then it's very easy for medical and regulatory to take the easy route of just saying, well, add this to be compliant, take that off to be compliant, rather than thinking, how do I make this a better material or activity?
I can certainly say that having an engaged client makes an incredible difference to any of us that supply the pharma industry, and being sitting on various judging panels, etc. The ones that stand head and shoulders above the rest is when that client's on that call. And we had one where the guy had got up at 4 a.m. in the US to be on the call for the judging panel. So engaged clients that are passionate, and the agency. But Katie, to this sort of consistency piece, I mentioned about in our one account where we had this huge turnover. Sometimes the agency is the only brand consistency, and actually outlast a number of people within the brand team.
Yeah, so we have a client that we've worked on for 7 years now. We've done the same in 3 indication launches for that same client. And it's one of the things I'm most proud of, because I've never worked on a brand that long, and the whole agency still loves it. But I would definitely say one of the biggest challenges is the amount of the kind of client team that have evolved across the time, and you end up starting again. They come in with brand new ideas and brand new fresh ideas. They often have their own agencies, so as the incumbent, you need to really be there for them and keep going. And And it's really difficult because we always kind of ask why, and we ask why we're creating stuff. We don't really believe in making work for making work's sake. But one point I did want to make today is that it's tough out there for agencies at the moment, and it takes a very brave agency to stand up to a client and say, you know, make this 10 pages and not 40, because we also need revenue too. And yeah, it is quite hard times. So I think there's a lot of things going on agency side where they just kind of take the work and run with it, and then the content doesn't really get used.
Yeah, 276 pages is good revenue for us as a business. but as a consultant, I advise everyone to stick to 10, right? So it's a natural conflict. So today's kind of mixed feelings for me. But in terms of people in role, and I do take your point, Kerianne, if there's a really clear, strong strategy, then it shouldn't really matter. But it's not just the churn, it's the pressures on people in pharma right now with all the reorgs. Just yesterday, one of our clients has now doubled his role because someone's left. And that's that classic thing is as people leave or are made redundant, suddenly you've just got more work to do in the same time frame. And I think anyone in the industry is really feeling that. And we will have clients turn up to a project meeting, clearly not having had any time to think about the project from the last meeting 2 weeks ago, and they make decisions on the fly that change. So for those of you in industry, in that, and I'd include you guys as well in terms of the pressure on field, like, is this constant drive for efficiency, and gosh, AI is going to solve everything, but is this constant drive and reduction actually getting in the way of doing good business?
Just one thing to add to that is that no one pays for thinking time. It's so hard to get time to think, and I just wanted to kind of make that point as well, is that no one on the client team has time to think, and neither does the agency. So actually, where's the partnership and the strategy that's developing over time? Sorry, Matt.
I think there's huge strain at the moment. We were talking about, most projects being most sort of RFPs, pitches being project-based now, rather than this long-term relationships that used to exist with agencies. And there's this very short-termist approach. We're obsessed with speed now and results, and we want instant impact. And the reality is, we know intuitively it takes a while to build brands and to have to make significant change. But as an agency now, if you haven't made impact within that project or within that period where the next brand plan comes around, then that's tough. People are looking at you. But the challenge is, the argument is that maybe we're not even measuring the right things, and maybe we're not even capable of measuring the right things at the moment. I look at pharma. I'm not speaking about the company I work for necessarily, but I don't believe we're well enough equipped to really measure the things that matter. We've got shed loads of data, but are we actually capable of making the right decisions from that data? Can we actually get meaning from these metrics? I don't think so. Not in the way that we want. And that may be because we're pressuring, marketeers into also being analysts and statisticians. Are we just producing dashboard after dashboard that is impossible to decipher sometimes? And I have seen that. And then you talk about strategy. You talk about long-term strategy. You've got that background of long-term strategy, but in the context of speed and churn, we've got to get this done, because if we don't do it in a particular window, then it's not going to be relevant anymore. The challenge is that you've got local teams moving at very different paces based upon their life cycle, based upon their level of maturity. And some will use that global campaign because it's right for them, and it may be the 4 or 5 markets that are probably doing pretty well anyway. But what about everyone else? I would love to know of the 80%, how much of that content is not being used by teams where it just isn't relevant. It's not that it might not be any good. It's just not relevant.
You beat me to the punch. I'm going to ask Kerianne to talk about this, but I was going to come back and manage global. But Kerianne, it sounded like when you mentioned earlier, you were talking about measuring, it's vanity metrics getting in, vanity KPIs, and we'll talk about sales KPIs as well, reach and frequency, driving the wrong behaviors. Agency revenue may be driving the wrong behaviors. What is it we need to, or maybe what you're doing right now? How do you look past the tick box into the impact?
I agree with that. We as an industry are looking at vanity metrics probably more than we should be looking at the actual impact of our activities and tactics. To quote, my favourite quote actually is Einstein quote, and he says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes trying to understand the problem and then 5 minutes solving it. So it's back to that whole point of what data do we have? Is it, what is missing? and where can we pull that from? So it's a nice, succinct dashboard so we can make quick, simple, agile decisions rather than trying to pull metrics and survey results and from random places and then making kind of somewhat random decisions and hoping that it flies and sticks. But just to come back to Katie's earlier point around collaborating with agencies, I do think there's something in the fact that the way we pay agencies, right, is whether they complete a project. Are we partnering with agencies and purposefully funding and paying based on impact? Because some industries, they will only pay 50% if you only achieve 50% of the outcome that you were trying to actually achieve. And that way, it forces you to collaborate early on what is the strategy behind this. Because it's in both of your interests.
When the creative agency that I'm involved in, 28C, we were actually just spitballing the idea of, could we actually charge per slide used in the field, as an example, rather than charge per...
Sounds good.
Because 4 slides, just so everyone knows, the average number of slides used in a call worldwide, thank you, Viva Pulse data, is 4. And in the UK, it's 3. So, it's not the same 3 maybe, but I would guess it's probably the same 3. Not for every pharma company. But we did toy with the idea of actually putting our money where our mouth is and saying, look, we're so confident that this is the right one. And yes, it's maybe more expensive for 15 pages than it is per page for 200, but this will get used. Problem with it is it's not just the agency involved in this getting done. And I'm conscious that in this lineup, we haven't got learning and development. Right? And we touched on earlier, Gareth, about the importance of giving field teams time to learn and to play. I was involved in the launch of a sales aid that we built but not designed. And it was very complex. It was segmented against the adoption ladder. You basically selected different treatment challenges, and that segmented the customer, went down a branch, and it ended up with a different flow depending on that. And then the field team were given it, and then half an hour later, I was playing a psychiatrist. We got a background in selling and mental health, and I was there to role play with them, and they'd had half an hour to look at this complex piece, and then in front of their peers, you've got to be confident as a rep, they were asked to role play with me as a psychiatrist. I felt that was wrong. So to talk to me a bit about your experience of how materials land in the field and how much room you're given to understand and play with them.
Yeah, so in recent years, I've seen it done very well, and also seen it done badly, and also personally probably guilty of rushing things out because you want to make the impact. And I think it's really important that we sort of hold ourselves back, train material out properly, allow time. And when I say time, that might be 3 or 4 days out of field for those then the messages to really land with customers. If you don't allow that time, you can't expect your materials to land.
And I'm just going to stick here for a second. I still haven't challenged global. But the other thing is sometimes I think we forget about the importance of people like Gareth here, which is we're very focused on the rep in front of the customer, but who sees that rep the most? If we've just seen with a hands up with field visits, it's not marketing. Lucky if they get out once a year into one rep. So these guys are the ones that are sitting down with the rep on field visits, watching the materials used. These guys should be better trained and better believe in the data and the content and what's being put out than the reps themselves, because you're going to be our advocates, our champions in the field. But to this point of communication, I am now going to challenge global. So global, you take too long, you're out of touch, right, and you never listen to your markets.
Correct. No, I don't know. I mean, it's really, really hard. It's a complex situation, but I think the biggest challenge is that we are, I think, at a global level, you like to try and seek alignment because alignment feels good. The reality is that it's not possible really to get complete alignment because individuals are in different places, markets are in different levels of maturity, exposure, or whatever you want to call it. So actually to get alignment means that you produce global strategies that are vague and relevant to maybe not everyone, So in an effort to focus, in an effort to be focused, you lack the nuance. I think there must be, and I don't know if anyone's found another way yet, but there has to be a different way to do that. that potentially prioritises, what the local teams are actually seeing, feeling on the ground, as opposed to the direction that global need to go in. Global need to shine a light. They need to point the direction that overall we need people to go in. But fundamentally, we find that I think the global strategy, and therefore the content that is often created off the back of the global strategy, that may be a really good reason why so much of it isn't used, because it's not relevant by the time it gets to the local teams.
Let's talk a bit about strategy, because we've got global and local here in many different forms. Well, one global and everyone else in many different forms. We're joined by Paul Sims over there. Hello, Paul. I was at the first Pharmageddon in Amsterdam, and Andrew Binns, who was unfortunately blocked from flying because he'd used up too much fuel, I think, and joined us on the big screen. And it's the first time I'd heard this put, and I thought it was really good. He was talking about the role of global. So Andrew Binns was the head of digital for AZ UK at the time. And he said, yeah, global's fine with brand strategy. Set that Northern Light. Give me the brand strategy. But please let affiliates do the marketing strategy. So I just wondered if Kerianne and or anyone else, and Mark, I know you're a strategist, want to talk to a little bit about that. Like, do you believe that we're well enough skilled within affiliate to understand the difference between those two things and for them to work well together?
I think I guess my view perhaps is that globally we try and do too much, and actually maybe the role is better served by being a connector and a sharer of information and genuinely sharing best practice, rather than going, here, share best practice, and then everyone switches off the laptop.
Those are very brave words.
Yeah, but no, I mean, that's the problem, is that we not only do we do the strategy, we try and do a campaign, then we do some content, all the rest of it. Maybe we don't need to go that far. I think the reality is that, and we were talking about this earlier, the reality is that global campaign is only going to be relevant for a certain period of time or a certain situation in your market, and if it's not, then how the heck do you localize that in the context of all the other things that you're doing with a lean team that doesn't have enough people working for it anyway, having to go through the localization process and MLR and compliance and all the rest of it. So it might be easier just to leave it on the shelf until it gets dusty, because actually everything's going pretty well anyway. Thank you very much. So I think we need to find a way, a global, of being better at acknowledging those local nuances and maybe not going quite as far in trying to do everything, because I don't know if it helps. I think we get to a point where that wastage just snowballs from that point. So if anyone wants to solve that for me, that'd be great. But maybe Kerianne will.
No, I don't know about that. I still think we have a fair amount of free reign, though. Like, even though the content might come from global, you still have free reign over the channel, over which customer, which HCP that you specifically target for what material. So there is still so much freedom in how to market a medicine in a UK affiliate. So whilst it is really important to collaborate early with global, I don't think it's the biggest issue here. And I think there is something around the materials that we choose, because we're also probably not doing well enough at thinking smarter and doing one specific tactic and then squeezing as much out of that as we can. So, for example, you might run an amazing meeting, a peer-to-peer meeting or something, and you can squeeze content out of that. You can squeeze videos, you can squeeze sound bites, you can squeeze podcasts, and it doesn't require so much work and effort. And therefore, maybe there's less wastage, because if you know that meeting was particularly successful, you get the feedback early, it was valuable, you measure the impact, then squeeze as much as you can out of that, rather than reinventing the wheel and constantly adding new tactics.
Do you feel like the global stuff, is it just sort of thrown over the fence at you? Off you go, use it as you will? Or is your experience that actually it does come with useful context, the strategy is clear, that there's a clear purpose for the material that has been created? Or is it just unveiled with grandeur and, ta-da, look at our wonderful new global campaign, off you go? Maybe both.
Yeah, a bit of both. Had experience with both scenarios, I guess. And it's no surprise, it's definitely easier to make good decisions on what content is going to be impactful when it's rolled out well. Surprise.
I mean, I agree with you, Kerry, particularly about maximising, a great event and that you want to use that in lots of different ways, and it makes everything easier in terms of compliance and review and really squeezing the orange for all the juice and the pips. But I do think that often global teams should be doing that for you too. You know, if they're going to run a webinar, which they often do, and it's, you know, then there's the whole dilemma as which markets can invite people if it's promotional, is it exactly the same indication, etc. You know, so there are all those difficulties. But if you've made that webinar, why do you not then, you know, make sure that you have recorded it and you've given it to all your local affiliates and they can use it? You also cut it up. You provide a transcript, because transcripts increase traffic to your websites. When you put that on, it increases your SEO and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's all these things that Global could do, but often don't. They'll just provide the headline and not do all the rest of it. You know, make a little fragment to go in an email. You know, there's all kinds of things you can do with all that material that you've got. But no, they've moved on to the next iteration of an email campaign or whatever that they're going to be delivering separately. Whereas actually, I think your point of maximising, taking one activity and really maximising that and repeating that message, you know, in different ways, in different formats, is really helpful in terms of your compliance review times and things, because we've already agreed that actually this is okay and we know what we can say and what we can't, etc. So it's often much quicker to do it that way. So yeah, I'd agree.
Okay, so there's a point there I definitely want to come back to, and you're going to hold me to that, which is, Mark, is your point about the throwing it over the fence. Because I think, and when we start talking about solutions to this problem, it's going to be fundamentally communication, right? If it's thrown over the fence from global to local, it's either too late or it's not appropriate, or they don't believe in it, or they're doing their own thing. And then compliance are giving it without context of what the hell is this going to be used for? Like I was telling this to Sarah, I actually helped an external medic for a pharma company turn on an iPad. I actually think it's the most intuitive device ever created by man, and I had to help him find the on button, right? So
as an individual person, it's not the whole of compliance.
No, but sometimes it feels like it is. But it's illustrative of you haven't been brought along on the journey. Yeah. And that's obviously an extreme example. But, you know, understand final form and modular content stuff is going to be a whole challenge. Agency, you know, poor briefing from brand teams to agencies is probably the number one thing for any agency in here. We end up having to rebrief it back with, is this what you wanted? Like, you know, right? A brief is the start of it all, right? Whether it be a global or affiliate. And then agency to field, or agency to brand team to field, or agency to compliance. It's a lot to do with this shared purpose, shared communication, and it does all start with a great brief. But before we do, I wanted to talk a little bit, because I can see Emma from Viva over there, and one of my favourite recent projects she did was the taxonomy, and we were talking about this earlier. So maybe a lot of this content that's being created is not used because you find out actually there's already some out there, and that can be the field asking for something new without realising it already exists. But it could be about global content, and then local make their own, and then another affiliate makes their own. And I think you have found 66 different terms for sales aids within PromoMats. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a challenge here to write more down.
Yeah, can everyone see if we can beat 66. But I think, you know, whether you've got any to-hand data around this, but it feels like there's, and I know you're making an awful lot of efforts around helping people see, oh, that already exists, right? But because I reckon a lot of this 80% is because there's multiple versions, even within the same market, of content. No data. Just wondering if you had any sort of stats around, because I know you're working on sort of AI to dedupe and all of that within PromoMats, and I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, there's so much there. But maybe go back to a little bit of on the data side things. For me, it was who's got access to that data as well. And one of the things we're working on, of course, is like single platform. Being able to see the piece of content going from the marketing or even earlier upstream marketing and then through to the sales. And there's that same piece of content, then you can measure it. Then you can see the impact, then you can see how our kids use. And I think at the future world where the agencies in this would see exactly what's happening to that content as well, brings you back into the strategy. I mean, that's all I leave us about what we built.
Yeah, and even maybe beyond the global marketing team into the scientific core platform, right? Your core claims, your scientific platform. So when that's first set up with, these are our differentiators, this is what we're going to be, and seeing that all the way threaded through to the use of slides in front of an HCP, and that key message that's come out of it would be a dream.
I mean, that sounds incredible. I think for context, sometimes we can't even see the job bags at the moment that are for our own brand. So there's a lot of silos happening at the moment. I think, we don't always know what's being rated for our own brand, and that's where that's happened.
Right, silos. Here's another one. So silos, right? So we've got marketing, compliance, and field here. And very often there's a conversation around commercial need to work more closely with medical. I would challenge that marketing need to start with sales first for what they're worrying about medical. I was out on a field visit. We're sitting outside I can't remember what therapy it was, outside a consultant's office and sitting with the representative in rare diseases, and out walks his marketing manager from the office. And the rep was like, oh, hello. And then there was no time. He had to go in and had to sit in front of the HCP to basically almost ask, why were they here? Right? What's that experience for the HCP? That's, for again, an extreme example of maybe not cross-functional working. What's your experience across your time, Gareth, of how involved marketing actually get in what salespeople do, and what the communication is around HCPs, but also around how content is used and what's working?
I'd say that what I've experienced is poor over the years. And I think, again, it tends to come down to size of organisation, where there are bigger silos, so there's a lack of communication, and I think a lack of appreciation of field insights that you can get from within your own organisation. I think is probably the overriding thing for me. Is they're often the last people to be consulted, is the people who are actually seeing the customers.
But I think
a little bit.
Sorry, going back to your original point and Gareth's point that you made, that, you used to rip up a sales aid and reorder it. Yeah. I mean, I didn't really hear that, but that, I presume on Viva you can see which pages have been used by a representative on their iPad, and so surely you can actually work from that and realise, well, actually nobody is using beyond page 12 or whatever, and develop the next iteration of the iPad in conjunction with the field force, and so that they, I often feel that the field force are left to hung out to dry. It's like, well, actually, we're finding this data very complex, and I don't quite know how to make a nice, simple claim and an easy story for it to tell. So we'll just dump the data in here, and we'll add all the caveats around it, and then we'll just let the rep go and work it out, and they can talk. And they don't even necessarily give objection handlers anymore.
I fully agree, and it comes down to the churn we were talking about earlier. We were talking about churn of people, and then it's kind of churn of campaigns. So you can get that data, but by the time you've got that data and you analyse the data, you've got a new campaign that you're rolling out, and we don't seem to learn from, the previous mistakes of, a 176-page detail when it should be 6 pages.
And you only know which pages a rep has used in Viva if they've opened the iPad, opened this sales aid.
That is also true. Hands up here. Witness that.
There's several reps that have done 12-hour calls or 24-hour calls because they just left it open. So very much all that. I often think that we're really dealing with and you've mentioned this before, like the middle to bottom quartile reps. Sorry, we're going to talk about field a little bit. I know there's lots of other channels, but field's still our most expensive, most important channel for a lot of brands. Maybe it's not as strong as it used to be. But it's your middle and lower quartile. Your top reps can sell off the back of a cigarette packet. They don't really need it. They can sell it, and they've got that relationship. The bigger the sales aid, the more ridiculous compliance fluff that we've had. Not fluff, the opposite of fluff. We've had to put it in there. I'll keep going back to it. Like, we do not need to explain what MG stands for in terms of milligrams and millilitres, etc. If the doctor doesn't know that, they shouldn't be practicing. But it's stuffed in there, and then they're given to the field team, and you're dealing with either new reps, new into role, etc. And there's just like that. We're pretty good at the science training, pretty good at the sales training, but campaign and storytelling, right? We talk a lot about storytelling, but we don't give the field teams very much, if anything, around story. Often it's just brand visuals, then straight into the science, and then there's a summary slide. It's a slide. A summary slide at the end, and there's no storytelling. And that's the rep's art.
We don't always make the use of our best representatives in the training out of materials as well. And the biggest successes I've witnessed have been where you're utilising your best salespeople to lift the bar for everybody else.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with that. When I worked years and years ago as a brand manager and training out, it was really, really helpful to have some real old school reps who really knew what they were doing, just to give sort of terminology and introductions and, you know, to link between pages and back to other parts of the detail aid, etc. They were so helpful for the newer reps who didn't have all that vocabulary or that ease yet, and just hearing other reps do it was great. And Kerianne, you were talking earlier to me about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's funny because we are experts in science, right, in our industry, and we deeply understand pathophysiology, and especially when you're a marketeer that's also been in medical, right? Like, we deeply understand science and we're science driven. However, how often do we really think about the science of learning and what really helps some things to stick? Not just for our HCPs, but for reps as well. Like, when we're training these materials out, we're kind of just doing what we've always done, and it's a presentation on a screen and everyone's sat there and they're taking notes. But when we think about how the world is moving, we're moving towards short form content and getting that dopamine hit from TikTok. And there's a reason why social media has grown as much as it has. And actually, I think there's something in the science of learning. What helps people to learn? What helps content to stick? I don't think we're really thinking about that deeply enough when we train our sales teams, but also when we educate our healthcare professionals.
Kerianne, it was interesting what you were saying earlier about when you were practicing in pharmacy. Actually, you didn't care about the science of the products. You just cared about whether it was going to work, who it was going to be prescribed for, whether it was going to be safe. That was it. So, we spend a lot of time on the science of our products that our customers really don't care about.
We need the story to bring the interest, right? The engagement, and the science can then support. But there needs to be a reason to engage with that science. We talked about role churn and how we're all short of time. Like I say, I don't think I've ever been as busy as I am right now. The last 2 years have been hardest 2 years. Everyone seems to be really busy. HCPs. Again, I'm going to thank Paul over there. Very first DPU event was on the death of the rep. And that's how Paul and I got to know each other. We had a LinkedIn spat around whether reps should even exist and whether MSLs are the future of the industry. And that post hit 250,000 views, right, on LinkedIn. It was incredible. And Paul and I said, we ought to do something. So created DPU, had the first event, and Paul, being prepared, read out a quote from, I can't remember the name of the guy, but a UK MD, and it was something like, it's going to paraphrase, with the shortage of HCPs, increasing patient lists and waiting times, it's now a moral obligation for us as an industry not to waste the time of our HCPs. Right? And just going in there and just pouring science at them, or even worse, doing a tell sell, is like, why are you here? What's the story that's going to engage with me, but also got to save them time? And then the science can follow. Like, science is critically important if you lead with that. Doctors aren't special, right? They're human beings who react to emotion and to storytelling. Then the science can come. But we do tend to lead with science.
Well, I'd say that that's not just for reps, that's for all materials. That actually, there's two types of thinking, fast thinking and slow thinking. And fast thinking is your instinctual thinking, that your brain automatically wants to go to. It takes less energy, less effort. And so it's why we jump to conclusions. And it's why it's very important in terms of the code that we never create a misleading impression. So that if somebody jumps to a conclusion from having read something that we have shown them, it is the right conclusion. But we don't have to put all our workings out on that page. We can just have a fabulous headline saying what our product does or how impactful it is. And we don't have to put in 300 studies or 300 patients, so this, and this, and dilute it all. We can just give them that message without putting all our workings out. And as long as that message is not misleading, the way that you have worded it, that's great. You can then go to their slow thinking when they've got more time, you can then give them the science, that they can then have the effort to actually go through and understand and give them the rationale as to why that fast thinking statement was actually true and why it is that way. But they are not looking for your promotional materials, I hate to tell you. They come across them like a parade. it happens in between patients. You go to check your emails and, oh, you've got an email from whichever pharma company. You're seeing it like that. You pop onto a website and an ad of yours pops up. They are not searching it out. They're not using it to swap for their MRCP exams. And so you need to engage them really quickly. And I think it's something like 5 times more people read the headline than any other content. So you need to get that headline right that actually gives them the message that you want to tell them. But to be able to distill that message, you need really good copywriters. You know, that isn't something that we can do easily. It is a skill. And lots of companies try to save money by not engaging agencies with great creatives there to look for the big story. And actually, I think they're doing themselves a complete disservice because you need the expertise of somebody who can pull that and actually then distill it into something that is much shorter than you would probably have been able to write yourself. And then you have the medical review of it to confirm that actually, surprisingly, this is fine. Actually, this is okay. This is great. I wouldn't have been able to...
We just need to clone you and put you in every single compliance team in across the industry. Kerianne.
Yeah, I agree, Sarah. And I think we need to consider that there is a question on the tip of every healthcare professional's tongue when they're interacting with pharma content, whether that's in a peer-to-peer sales meeting or on one of our websites. And that question is, what does this mean for the patient that's sat in front of me? In clinic, in that hospital bed, what does this mean? How is this going to change my clinical practice? How is this going to change the patient's lives? And that is a question that I think should be at the forefront of our mind whenever we are creating materials or tactics or plans, is kind of get to the point early and start with that point first.
Totally agree.
But to be controversial,
Well, you are from Global.
do they trust? You know, we talk, so they're human beings. They're healthcare professionals who happen to be human. Or no, the other way around. The human beings happen to be healthcare professionals, right? So instantly we treat them as someone different, even though they're just normal people. I don't know how much they trust pharma at the moment. We try and solve that problem by communicating them through the content that we create. Because we're not measuring the impact of it particularly well, it's very easy to blame the content. So we create more content, which may actually create more distrust because we're just coming to hit them with the same message, slightly tweaked with a slightly different image. So I don't know whether we're able to really measure the level of trust, the level of belief in what we are doing as an industry. I know there's always been that sense of big bad pharma and all the rest of it, but I don't know. I'm not sure what the evidence is. I don't know if anyone has any data on that at the moment. That's a big challenge. So it's very easy for us to go, oh, that campaign didn't work. Let's do another campaign. Let's create more content to answer that. And it's going to be more content that isn't necessarily used. Go on.
Yeah, my personal belief is that we're in the business of building trust.
Yeah.
And our representatives are at the forefront of it. I don't think we put enough focus on building those early relationships, because you get those early relationships right, you build the trust, and then from that trust, it'll mean that all the other content will land. Yeah. It'll be accepted, it'll be looked at, and it'll be viewed on with favourable eyes. I think that's absolutely key for all of our organisations, that we focus on those relationship building. And often it does need to be person to person, hence why the representative hasn't yet died out.
It is really difficult to measure, right? Yeah. If you're going to do like a satisfaction EMPS, if you do that with the rep in the room, like, of course they're going to rate it highly. No one's going to say you suck, right? If you do it afterwards, there's so many difficult ways to do it. But even without measuring it, we can do better. So I'll give a challenge here to anyone that's ever run an omni-channel campaign. Or let's make it even simpler. Let's say someone has sent out, you've created a series of videos featuring a KOL talking about a therapy area. And then you send out a promotional email to your target list, whether you're in field or in marketing. Can you honestly say, hand on heart, that email didn't land on the inbox of the KOL that made the videos, promoting the videos that KOL wrote and starred in? How does that make that person feel? We're so poor at targeting, excluding, and using, you said this earlier, using data, and the field is just one source of it. We talk about personalized omnichannel journeys, and yet they're certainly not sniper rifle. Right? You say, oh, it's personalized because we know he's a dermatologist and she's a rheumatologist. That's not personalized content and journeys. And other industries achieve it. And I just think we're very good at using data in R&D, and we're shocking at using data in our commercial sector. So I don't know if anyone speaks to that, because that's trust as well.
I did a bit of a survey before we came to this panel of about 20 people who reported to me over 3 or 4 organisations, and it was really, really telling about just focusing on approved email. So your lower performers either send nothing or act like spam bots and have really low kind of open rates. Your medium performers send very few because they think about how their customer is going to perceive them by sending an email. So they kind of, they think their customer will fall out with them because they've sent them an email. And so they tend to send quite a low number, but get reasonable open rates. But your top performers send a reasonable amount of content, not huge amounts, drive good open rates, and that's only because they contextualize what they're going to send. So they'll tell the customer in the call, I'm going to send you this piece of information that covers off what we said, just as a reminder. Check your spam, it'll be in that, or that piece, this email will handle this information you've requested, look out for it. Or they'll follow up with a nice Outlook email explaining what they've sent, why they've sent it, and then they'll look at the approved content.
Don't tell Sarah they sent an Outlook email with what they sent her.
You're allowed to communicate with the customer.
A little bit, but
when you've got their consent, you're allowed to liaise with the customer, provided you're not making any brand claims. But you're allowed to tell them what you've sent them, where they're finding.
Personal plea to anyone that's involved in creating field emails: please stop just asking reps to send marketing emails. It's not a marketing email channel. You have those. It is about the emails that respond to a clinician's need, and that's fundamental here. We're talking about understand the customer, understand their needs, only send them what's relevant to those needs, and that will build trust, reduce content wastage. But we've also got to educate people who do this on what the right content is for the right customer at the right time.
I'm really passionate. If you want every call followed up by an email, well, don't leave it in the hands of the representative, just automate it, because you're effectively asking your representatives to become spam bots. So just automate that if you want everyone followed up with a particular piece of content, but then allow your good performers to tailor the content they're going to send their customers.
I mean, the personalization thing, and let's talk about personalization without talking about AI, because otherwise we'll be here all night, or James will get angry. You can't get more personalized than a rep visit, and that's the way it should be, because your reps talk to your biggest, your best customers. But we're on this quest to be ever more personalized with everyone, and the reality is we don't know them as well as our A customers. Let's call them our A's. So what do you do with your B's and your C's? That comes down to what information you've got on them, whether they've given you consent, whether you even know who they are. So we're on this quest to be ever more personalised, but I don't think we've actually got the information to allow us to really do it in the way that we want. We can, we try and compare ourselves with the likes of Netflix or whoever, but we're not there. We don't have that level of information and data to be able to do that. So I think from a global point of view, one thing that we can do and one thing we should do is we have to be able to give guidance around where that effort should be. There's no accident why we spend a lot of money with the field force activity, because that's where the quality interaction happens. And the data always says that, right? It's sales rep visits are way outperform anything else. But what we're not doing and what we need to do better is to really fully enable the sales teams to understand how they can leverage all of the other content that is created in a way that helps them do their job better, not in a way that is Big Brother looking at them to see how many emails they've sent or what pages they've used. That sense of what's in it for me, we're not very good at communicating that, I think, in a meaningful way. Oh, God, it's just another detail aid now that I'm not going to use. There's so much baggage even just associated with that phrase, isn't there, DSA or CBA? Actually, it's a really useful tool, not just for you, but for us. To your point, if we use it well, we can actually learn. It helps us get closer to our customers. It helps us to be more targeted. It helps us to be more personalized. But if we're not capturing that data in the first place, then it's just yet another piece of content.
Have you
Yeah, I'm kind of sitting here pondering whether personalisation is the way that we're going to solve the mistrust in our industry, because I'm not sure it is, because I don't necessarily trust Tesco Clubcard because they now have more data on me and are sending me personalised vouchers. Like, don't get me wrong, it's great, but I'm not sure that builds trust. I think I would love to see a world where the pharmaceutical industry are genuinely making ethical decisions based on patient need. Like, how often do we really think about patient equality and equity? And do we really start with, let's target the HCPs in the areas where the patients need us most, like areas of deprivation? I'd love to see a world where we're more purposeful in that. And I think those kinds of ethical considerations will build trust in our industry over and above being personalised.
With the caveat that it has to overlap with the commercial, right? But because we hear this a lot of different events around patient outcomes being first. So, some of us work in a place where we can't genuinely hold our hand up and say what I do on a daily basis improves patient outcomes, right? What we're looking for is that Venn diagram overlap, right? And that's where field medical is a big, with question marks. Like eventually they report to someone who's in commercial, right? We're not a charity as an industry, but we can do good by doing good work. That's what I'm going to open it. Oh, sorry, you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to say that I think one of the big issues with pharma is that it just talks about its brand, and they don't go wider. And actually, to gain trust from healthcare professionals, you need to look at what are the problems the healthcare professionals have got. And one of the problems they have is, like, they are deluged with data all the time because there's so much data coming out. But we don't just want data on your brand. We maybe want key information about the disease area or cross-collaboration with other specialist areas. We want to hear what do cardiologists say about use of this drug in this condition or whatever. I think we could think much more broadly and be much more trusted and gain sort of the trust of the healthcare professionals that we're not just in it for the brand. Obviously, ultimately, you are looking to sell your brand, but there are many problems that you can help solve, and things like collaborative working in the UK can be really, really helpful to actually help solve problems on the ground.
I am going to bring it back to content, though, right? Yeah. Because this is like how we should be better as an industry, and I want to keep us really focused in on.
You're right.
Because trust is important. You had a point.
I think the other thing we're not talking about is that a lot of the content we're talking about here is stuff that we're feeding. The pharma company is feeding the HCP, but what about the other way around? Like, for me, there's not enough on-demand content. There's not enough ways that the HCP at any time of the day or night can be thinking about a patient challenge they've had that day and want to go and find out about the possible product or brand that they could use or prescribe for them. And for me, that's where we're going to build trust more. It's like we're just giving a lot out, but actually, where can they come to us?
So we talked a lot about trust there as a in the context of content, but I think we may have travelled a little bit further out than the topic of this. So I'm going to bring us back, and I'm going to open to questions in a second. I'm just going to make a statement before I do, which is we talked there about building the trust with our customers by understanding them, what's in it for me. I think that's one of the keys here, which is global need to think about what's in it for the local affiliate to adopt my content, right? What's it going to mean to them? How much work is involved? How much resources involved? How can I help them absorb it and do it properly? Then into compliance. What's in it for them? Like, bring them in early, etc., and then for agency and then into field. I think that sort of communication is key. But I'm not sure we got an extra mic at the back for roving for the audience, or shall I use mine? Or should we just see if anyone's got any questions? Just speak loudly. It'll pick up because we're recording on the camera as well. Any questions for the audience? Terry.
Yeah, hi. Quick question about modular content, because obviously you said at Beat Summit there's quite a lot of modular content. So I guess question for anybody, but for the audience, what impact do we think, if it is implemented well, that might have on content wastage? And second, has anybody SPC done well and use effectively in organisations?
No. It's been talked about for years, not seen it. Think AI might get ahead of it. I'm going to give my half penny's worth. I'm going to open it because I'm opinionated on this, which is centres of excellence, cheaper to produce content. Modular content, quicker and cheaper to produce content. AI just shoveling content out there doesn't mean the content's any good. And I fear that the easier and quicker it is to smash that button and push content out, this problem's going to get worse if we don't think about the before bit, right? Is this the right content, who it's for, etc. The cheaper and quicker you produce the content, the more I think we're under this problem. But I know I'm the chair and I shouldn't be sharing my opinion so much. But over to the audience, to the delegates.
Yeah, I've used modular content with a couple of companies. I would agree neither of it has been good. It's not. Basically, compliance have really struggled with it. They can't get their head round that, no, we're not asking you to certify in final form. We're asking you to certify a fragment that will be a building block for either a local affiliate or one of the global teams to actually use together. And they've really, really struggled with it and wanted to put prescribing information on every single module, for example, and then you'd have 6 pieces of prescribing info, So they've really struggled. So maybe it goes back to communication, but I think your point about is the message right in the first place is much more important. But compliance often do tie themselves in knots about, well, you can't have this module with that module, and you've got to have, all those kind of rules. And I think there are rules around, sort of business rules around using modular content in terms of, there might be a module that you always have to put first, for example, or you always have to include, but then you get to choose 3 or 4 different ones underneath. So they might be those. And sometimes it's useful to have those business rules around, well, if your customer is at this stage, if it's an email campaign in the adoption ladder, then use module 4 and 5, but if they're at this stage, use module 6 and 7. So that it can appear that it would be really useful if it was done well. It's just that I've not actually seen
There's
it.
no question it's part of the solution.
Yeah.
It's just maybe not being done well. Mark?
I think the concept of modular content makes all sorts of sense, doesn't it? The intention, I think, of being able to give teams a Lego box of things to be able to use as they want. But I think the reality is that it becomes more of a straitjacket, if anything. You must use these things, and you've got to try and use them in order and localize them. It's not actually helpful. You're probably better off with a really clear strategy and allow some local, flexibility in terms of how you bring that to life. Otherwise, you're just creating a whole bunch of modules that no one's going to use. You've just compounded the problem. The modular content helps you measure, right? It helps you be a bit more personalized. It helps you follow up with things and all the rest of it. So we get the purpose of it, but I don't think we've sold the what's in it for me. I don't think we've solved that. It's just more modules, more content. This is going to be really helpful. No, it's not. It's just now I've got 25 pieces of content to approve rather than 2 or whatever.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Neil?
First off, I think we probably do ourselves a bit of a disservice by assuming that HCP don't trust pharma. And I think we've come an awful long way. So if you look at last year's Ipsos ABPI survey, it would suggest that HCP ranked pharma higher than almost any other industry in this country, and that is saying something. So that should be applauded. The second point is the common thread was about being able to tell a story that resonates and is relevant. We've got lots of functions and disciplines represented. Who should take responsibility for the ultimate story?
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question so everyone can hear it. So the first off, totally agree, Neil. Neil was saying, essentially, we do ourselves a disservice about saying we're not trusted by HCPs. The data is showing the other way around. And again, I was at Pharmageddon in Philly, and I got very emotional at this because the whole room was talking about how we can work harder to build trust. And as an industry, we work so hard at it. I don't know anyone that has any isn't doing the right thing, isn't doing it for the right reasons. So I do believe we should be easier on ourselves. Second part of that question is the red thread through this has been the importance of storytelling and crafting with purpose, etc. Who owns that story? Let's start with global.
I think we own I think global owns the synopsis, right? We have to set the vision and set the longer term target. But the reality is that probably the details of the story are quite different depending on which local team, which disease area you're working with. You're talking about. So from a global point of view, I think if you try and tell the entire story, then the story in itself ends up being quite easy to unravel because it's probably not actually that relevant. It ends up being too broad and while it's a nice story, maybe it's not as compelling for some people than and others. Maybe not something you'd read at bedtime or something like that. So I think let's put it this way. I think it's Global's responsibility to write the series of books, and maybe even some of the chapter headings within that series. Maybe even have a think about when that series is going to be rolled out, right? Is it what's the cadence of that, and give local teams much more space and much more headroom to plan as to when these things are going to happen. It's just I see too much. Oh, here's some new data. Great. Here's some new data. Here's some new data. Now do something with that. Do something with that. Do something with that. And you've got teams going, what? I don't know what to do with that. How am I going to fit that into my story that I'm trying to tell at a local level? So I think the story, the powerful storytelling, is happens with Gareth and the sales team. That's the real story, but I think the global team probably has to have control of that high-level vision, the anthology, if you like, of the
maybe like the theme and the narrative.
Yeah.
It's from global, and it's refined by affiliates, informed by medical, sharpened by agency, delivered independently to an HCP relevant to their needs, and flexed all the time. I mean, that's the chain, right? But it often doesn't happen that way because that story isn't consistent all the way down, and it's broken. And I think that's often because we don't take the time to communicate that story and why it's so important, etc. We focus on our external customers. We rarely focus on our internal customers.
I think in that narrative that you've just done, I think, won't the agency have written the story? I mean, the agency will have actually written it.
Yeah.
And I think marketing own it. And like you say, medical will have had input. But that's all I was thinking.
Agency support at a local level, but
smithing of an actual story is a huge skill. And I don't think.
And I think you need to consult on it.
Yeah,
personally,
I agree.
I think you need the involvement of sales, because if they don't like the story, they'll tell their own story, as you alluded to earlier. So it needs everybody involved. Creative agency to bring the ideas forward, sales to make them practical, marketing to make sure they're on strategy. It's and compliance to ultimately sign it off.
Okay, is there anyone in the room that's involved in content, has seen that work all the way through, and is confident that something maybe they created at a global level really saw it impact at a local level, or maybe at an affiliate level and impact? Anyone willing to put their hand up and speak to that at all? That's probably very telling, isn't it? Okay.
Maybe once in too many years to remain.
All right. Any other questions from the audience coming up? Paul.
I find the conversation about trust quite frustrating because every single person in this room is already an expert in trust. They do it every single day with their friends and their family. And we know what creates trust. We know that if we only talk about ourselves for the older days, we're not going to have a second date. We know that transparency is often the thing you do when you lose trust. Like, I don't read my partner's text messages unless I distrust my partner, right? Otherwise, you actually trust each other. And there's so many aspects of personalization, as Kerianne said. It's, a songwriter doesn't personalize their song so everybody listens to it, yet people play that song at their wedding because it feels personal. You don't need personalization to feel like a good story will resonate with so many people. I agree with the emphasis used about the storytelling. But why do we, when we enter our professional lives, forget the fundamental rules of trust that we all know so well each and every day? I think the answers are very obvious, actually. I don't think we need to data to be able to find any answers.
I've been thinking about this since Farmageddon, and I think a lot it's to do with the lack of trust we have internally with our teams and people, trusting them to do the right thing. And I'm not going to point directly at the ABPI, but I went through that as a rep 26 years ago, 30 years ago, and I actually put it on a LinkedIn post this morning, that you couldn't do curries in the evening anymore, even though the curry involved an AV presentation. Then you couldn't take people to a hotel for an evening meeting, even with a KOL, if there was a golf course anywhere nearby it. And then you couldn't do it, and then you couldn't give away, and then you can, because basically the feeling was that the reps will, as soon as they're allowed to, they're going to step outside of the bounds of ethical working and all the rest of it. And I feel that trust in people doing the right thing builds this. No one's willing to stick their head above the parapet because of that lack of trust. And I think that bleeds out externally. That's just a thought. I mean, it's not the only answer. What are the people to think to this?
I mean, it's refreshing as Neil, isn't it? Refreshing to hear that. I think maybe we can be a bit glass half empty on that when actually things have changed, particularly since COVID and other things, which is great. I think maybe that sense of lack of trust is more of an internally an internal thing. We really hope, don't we, when we create a global campaign, that people are going to use it. We really hope that they understand the story. We really hope there's a lot of hope involved. And I think when you're hoping a lot, then maybe it doesn't feel quite so secure, and all of that work that you're putting in is maybe not going to see the light of day. But on the other hand, I don't know if this is 100% true. I don't know if anyone has ever lost their job for creating more content. Right? Creating more content is actually maybe that's job sustainability right there, because we're not actually measuring whether the content's actually any good anyway. Or is it really doing what we want to do?
No one's ever been fired for creating a website, even if no one's ever visited the website.
No, but people have lost their job for things not being compliant, or all the rest of it. So I think there's a safetiness to content. We can try and use it to solve a trust problem. We can try and use it to solve problems, and then we can quite easily blame the content.
That's the compliance team. They've heard what's going on.
Sorry.
Anyone else speak to Paul's challenge on? I think the challenge there, whilst not that personalised content isn't what's going to build trust. I get that. Like, what is it about how we turn up that means that we're not building trust as easily, maybe as we used to?
Well, I completely agree. I did say earlier that I don't think you should just be talking about your brand. You've got to be thinking about what are the problems that your customer actually has, and how can you help, as a huge pharma, small pharma, medium-sized pharma, how can you help them in their day-to-day lives? It's not all about your brand. It's a much wider problem than that you can probably help solve. And we don't. And part of the reason that we don't a lot of the time is because we have become too compliance-led. We're too compliance first, and that isn't the way that it should be. It should be about impact first, about how we are helping people solve the problems that they have. What do we have to offer that we can help them solve their problems? And then how do we do it in a compliant way? That is, obviously, I'm going to advocate that we do things in a compliant way, absolutely. But when you're doing something new and innovative, and you're navigating, uncharted waters, you don't have certainty that it is going to be seen as compliant if there is a challenge. But you have to actually determine that actually you're comfortable with the level of uncertainty, the level of risk that you are willing to take, because this is ultimately the right thing to be doing, and that's what your guiding star is, that you are doing the right thing and you believe it to be compliant. You have minimized risk as much as possible, but you probably have not been able to eliminate it completely. And you have to go with that. Yeah. And I think that's changed.
No, I agree. And I think the reality is the healthcare system in this country is stretched, right? Like, it's really stretched. And I think since I've started working in this industry, I've noticed a shift where I'm seeing a growing appetite for collaboration with our industry, which is a really good thing. And it does show perhaps the tide is changing on trust. And I think that includes not just collaborative working and things like that, but actually collaboration on education. Because when I worked in the NHS, I was flat out. I would be seeing 60 patients a day. I'd be reviewing their drug charts. From the minute I stepped in, from the second I left, I would be flat out. And I didn't have 5 minutes to learn. So if a pharmaceutical company came in and said, I'm going to offer you a lunch and learn session, I'd jump at it. And it genuinely wasn't just for the lunch. It was because I wanted to learn. I had an appetite to learn. And most healthcare professionals are in their industry because they want to help patients, but crucially, they're sciencey. They love to learn. They want to grow. So I think there is an appetite to collaborate with us. And I think if we need to keep heading down this track, because the need is there.
I just want to try and join trust and content, because I think what I was trying to get at is what you're saying, is that there is a tendency, particularly for that face-to-face interaction, there is a tendency for okay, here we go again. Here's the right? Here's the data bit, the science or the sell. What you're saying is that it can't just be that, and it shouldn't always just be that. And the reality is it isn't, right? I mean, we know sales teams go above and beyond in terms of the problems they solve and all the rest of it. But I think from a content point of view, are we challenging ourselves as an industry to genuinely provide useful content that can help solve problems, that can answer questions? I don't know.
And in a format and delivery channel that, as Kerianne's point earlier, that isn't, a 1.5 hour video or etc. Katie, did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think a lot of content will be out writing, because taking a box from the brief from the client actually with it solving an A things. HCE in front of us, I'm not really sure.
Okay, so we're running up on time. We've got 8-9 minutes left. So any questions, Henriette?
Yeah, I just want to say as well, I don't recognize the trust. 我们开始现在你 having this you have surveyed this industry for about 20 years now. I really recognize it, and I think it's become a little bit of it is hide behind that because they don't trust us. I don't think that's the problem. I recognize everything that's been discussed today. I think we've got such a long way to go. It's mind-blowing how little companies would actually for that. My question is, if we were minded as an industry to the HCPs, if it's 60%, if what the client is relevant to them and they're every day, and be more agile to respond to that. Because it's changing all the time. The landscape is changing constantly. I think that would make Gareth and the sales teams, and I've seen it, I've had these donkey years. It will want to listen to the world. If it's relevant, if it serves a purpose, if it provides value, because who doesn't want to walk in and see an HCP and understand that the situation is persistent? I think that's enough here. But it's not good to say two things every single time, because my reps, they didn't have new data all the time. They didn't have new materials all the time, because it's everything going to need to co-fish, right? But we would definitely be looking at the frequency messaging, right? Frequency and coverage, especially the headquarters, generally about frequency and coverage, right? But you can get those meetings, so that they're open UUSs, you're going to look at the websites. If you are not running it outside of a busy day, no. So can we solve a lot of this by being more agile from Google? I go Google now, IP, agile, and listening to what you're.
So I'm going to summarize that maybe, just because of time, so I can put it back. It's very clearly put, but just for those that maybe couldn't hear it, is maybe the content waste could be addressed by making sure the content that we deliver, and it could be lots of it, because it may need to be lots of it because there's lots of needs, is relevant to the HCP at that time. And it goes back to that, what feels like a prehistoric, the right customer, the right time, the right content, or whichever order you want to put those in. Gareth, you made a point earlier that we're not really good. We're not utilizing the field's insights into customers, and that can only be for the target customers. And Mark, you made that point. But I'm going to mention AI again. AI runs on data. That's the fuel that it runs on. And yet, as an industry, we are not very good at capturing that data to CRM. It's my particular passion area. That if we could build that organizational knowledge around our customers from those interactions by being better with content and data, that then supercharges the omni-channel, non-personal, so that we don't send that KOL a promotional email highlighting the videos that he starred in or she starred in, right? So, and if you gave the field team something that gave them access, like an insight around a new guidelines or whatever, that's what they're hungry for. But so is what the HCP's hungry for. So I don't know if you want to speak to the hunger for new.
Well, I think the insights piece, I think we don't give it enough credit because it's difficult to measure. We're obsessed with measuring things. We measure too much. Because we've got the data, doesn't mean we should measure everything. So I think we should be really, I don't know, if we trim down what we sought to measure, measured only the relevant things and gain the insights on a continual basis that were coming from the field, then I think we'd be in a much better place. And then involve all the stakeholders, including compliance, so that we can generate appropriate material more quickly. And it might not need to be snazzy and branded. It might just be, bits of educational content that a customer's requested. The agility piece is something we need to get better at.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think relevance is key, but also the channel. I would love to know, of that 80%, how much of that is digital material on a website or a pharmaceutical website, and the HCP isn't going to go there because that's not where they want to go. When I first studied to be a pharmacist, I made an Instagram page to better upskill and learn and just share what I've learned with my community. And within a week, I hit almost 2,000 followers on that account, and that was about 5 years ago. So I think we assume that HCPs want to go to our website and want to see a rep to learn. Are we really thinking about how they engage? Because they are human beings, right? And a lot of us want content on demand, on our phones, or while we're sat around at home quickly. But compliance makes that really difficult.
Can't believe.
Let's just end it there.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be difficult. It really doesn't. And obviously, we have electronic systems now for review and approval. We don't actually have to even use them for review and approval. We can do it. There's no mandatory way that we have to do review and approval. It can be done in one step, straight to certification, outside of any of your electronic approval systems, as long as I can see it on a staging site or with emulator software, and I can do it in one go if need be. And we do see examples of that even in code cases where people have been accused of, they can't have certified it, and it's been shown to be turned around within 24 hours. So it is possible, but it's all about, I think, people understanding the code more so that they can challenge what their teams are actually doing. And the earlier you involve compliance, as I think we've already said, the more likely it will travel through easily.
So I'm going to have to bring it to an end because we're at time. Sarah said it's possible, just so everyone knows. So when you go back and you're struggling with the compliance team, just say, Sarah says we can do this in one go, right? So I'm just going to ask each of the panelists, I know you had a question, but we are at time, so we can maybe do it down the pub. Thoughts, last thoughts, summaries, advice you might give. I'm going to pick on, I'm looking over there, I'm going to pick on you. Dave.
So I think as an industry we need to focus on quality content, generate less, train it out better, and support the field teams in how they can deliver it better to the customers.
Nice and clear. Katie.
It feels like this is there's many factors that are causing this kind of massive content waste, and I guess my number one aim would be just because we can create something doesn't mean that we should. So next time if the opportunity comes up to make something new, let's look at what we already have and let's see what we can repurpose, tell better stories with what already exists, and try and change this for the future.
I'm going to do a little plug here. One of the categories I put in for the PMI Awards, Pharmaceutical Marketing Impact and Innovation, as they're now called, which is the PM Digital Awards, as they were called, was the Longevity Award, where celebrate campaigns that are over 3 years old. We love a disposable campaign. Can we learn and iterate, reuse, please? Anyway, sorry, next one, Sarah.
No, I agree and would reiterate, yes, let's make materials that are impact first, relevance, use first, and compliance very much second. Yes, it's a necessary prerequisite. Involve us early. We're much more likely to actually be able to help you actually build it in such a way that we are not going to be the stumbling block. We are all on the same side. We are all on the same team. And, I think if we think we're going to deliver something great, then it's inspiring for everybody. And so get the content right and we'll be on board.
Thank you, Kerianne.
Yeah, I agree. Impact over volume. And I also would say, as an industry, let's do better to make data-driven decisions.
Well, that was snappy. I think it's time to bust the global-local model wide open, isn't it? I think we don't. It's having a yearly brand planning cycle, which is not actually that helpful. You can't be relevant, right, if you're going to do that. So, there's room to rethink that, and I think we must, because the snowball starts to gather speed at global, right? And then, from a content point of view, we just create more and more content. It's not our problem, is it? Pharma are not we're not bad at creating content. We create loads of it. That's the problem. Is it the right content? So definitely food for thought there. What was your name? Sorry. Thank you for that. That was a really good point. That's going to get me thinking. And then I think the other thing is just we need to think about the role that global plays. You know, do global teams really need to be delivering content as well? Do we need to be setting the course, setting the vision, and actually holding back and enabling local teams to have the confidence to be reactive, to be relevant, to be compliant, and potentially rethink that role? Is it storyteller, or is it storyteller and writer and creative director? I don't know. So something for us to think about there. But I also think from an agency point of view as well, it is that sense of this tension at the moment that exists between. It's quite a fearful environment at the moment. This sense of, can we really challenge our clients and our global teams at the moment? Frankly, we'd be happy just to have some business that we can depend on, and that is making it even easier at the moment. I think just to create more stuff, rather than question whether it's the right stuff.
And that's the bravery. So since COVID, year on year, there's been a 20% increase on promotional content housed on ProMats, if I remember my stats correctly. We all feel that when we're short of time, short of people, and yet all we're doing is producing content and shoving it out there. I think the overriding thing here is using data to challenge the content that's required, thinking about the relevance, maybe working on the speed. For me, it's about communication. There are people who are good at this, but maybe they're just not good at communicating it to the next person in the chain, to the next person in the chain. Be brave, stand up. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much to Mark, Kerianne, Sarah, Katie and Gareth. Round of applause.
Thank you.